The nominations, according to the IBC timelines, beginning or are set to be conducted between April 13th and the 26th of that month. Stay with us here on KTN News. We shall be covering the party primaries in the way only we can. So let's talk about the cockerel party, Kanu, and what's next. As we told you before, the National Executive Council meeting has been postponed from tomorrow to Thursday, the 23rd, where the chairman, Gideon Moi, will be expected to present a report on the way forward for the party. Joining me in studio to discuss that tonight, I have with me Dr. Alex Awiti, Director, East Africa Institute at the Aga Khan University, Professor Eri Tumbo, political governance experts, as well as joining us from our City Center studios is Dr. Walter Ongeti, a governance and strategy expert. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. So let me start with Dr. Much has been said about, before we get into what works for Kanu in which side, about a visit of the President Uhuru Kenyatta to the retired President Daniel Arap Moi, as well as a few weeks before that, or a few days before that, Mama Ngina Kenyatta also visited the retired president. Much debate has been made about this picture and that it purports to the leaning of Kanu in terms of supporting the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta. What do you make of these visits?
I think, thanks, Ben, for having us here tonight. I think what's interesting about this visit is that they chose to make them public. You know, it would be very easy for Mama Ngina to pay a visit to retired President Moi as a friend, and that becomes a personal family visit. But the fact that they chose to make that public is intended to send some political messages. And who would have done the same thing? The president goes to many places, we never get to know about them. But he himself posted this on his Facebook page. So I think that says a lot of things. The question is, what is the political message and for who? But I also think that everybody should understand the historical, long-standing relationship between former President Moi and the Kenyatta family. And I think that is much, the bond of closeness is thicker than what the political experiences might dictate. And, and I think now it's crunch time, it's decision time, and a lot of people have said that President Moi has for a long time served as Uhuru's advisor, and Mama Ngina and Moi go ways back. So the question is, there's a political message. The question is, who is the message intended for?
Prof, what do you think is a message intended for? And what is a message?
Thank you, Ben. I think that the message is that Moi, we're asking Moi to recommend to his son Gideon that he should join with us in order to advance both their agenda and our agenda. Two, the second part of that message is that if there is anybody in the two groups, the Kenyatta group and the Moi group, who has been a beneficiary of those two clans or those two homes, the message is, we are going this way. So if you are hesitating, please revise your program and go this way.
All right. Great. And remember, we're also seeking your views on this on our Twitter poll. The question we're asking you, should Kanu support the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta? Tell us what you think. Tweet us at Ben_Kitili at KTN News. The hashtag is Choice 2017. Dr. Walter Ongeti joining us live from our City Center studios. What is your takeout from these visits that we have been seeing to the retired president?
I think, first of all, good evening, Ben, and good evening, Professor and Daktari. In my view, this message, I would agree partly with the Prof that the message is meant for the supporters of these two families, that they have been in a wonderful working relationship for a while. Right. And of course, then, in my view, just trying to manage each other's, the supporters' expectations, the Kanu supporters' expectations. Because if there is likely to be a declaration on Thursday, which was meant for tomorrow, as you've put it, then the supporters would want to have been convinced that there is a relationship that exists and that there is no better person to signal that than President Moi. You'll realize that Kanu can always be associated to retired President Moi, and of course that relationship is strong enough. The current leadership, crop of leadership in Kanu, is running that leadership on the goodwill of President Moi. And so, in my view, it was better to have that message coming out in a manner likely to suggest that it has been endorsed from President Moi.
All right, let's get into it, Daktari. What would be the impacts of Kanu supporting Jubilee, or the other way around, Kanu supporting NASA, where we did see the Secretary General Nick Salat speaking at the NASA launch and sending the party into some kind of disarray? What would be the impact of both scenarios from where you sit?
I think, if we
my thinking is that if Kanu supports Jubilee, then it becomes sort of like a fighter brand, like we spoke last time. Sort of like then it can actually be used for aspirants who may not be comfortable to go to the primaries of Jubilee.
All right.
Can easily associate with Kanu. And of course, then at the same time, Kanu can actually be able to have its own candidates. And after the elections, if Jubilee wins, then Kanu would be able to support it in parliament. If the other way occurs, so much so that Kanu is either left to be a loose cannon or rather supports NASA, then it becomes a nuisance value to Jubilee because in terms of perception, people would be saying that, even Kanu is supporting NASA, and so it is in the interest of Jubilee to have Kanu on its side, and of course, NASA has been attempting. You realize that previously the CORD and indeed ODM in 2007 had a lot of strength in the Rift Valley, and that strength has diminished over time with the growing politically of Deputy President. And so they've been attempting to use Kanu for a re-entry in the Rift Valley.
All right.
That re-entry will be thwarted if Kanu were to support Jubilee.
All right. Dr. Awiti, do you agree?
So my sense is we just stop pussyfooting around this issue. I think this is about the political calculus for 2022. Gideon Moi is a politician of commendable means. He comes from big money, and he has a big name behind him, and he has the backing and personal friendship of President Kenyatta. If he wants to take a stab at the presidency in 2022, he has no business supporting NASA or whatever name they're going to call that thing. The question is, what signals does it send inside the Jubilee party? What does it do to the dynamic between Mr. Kenyatta and Mr. Ruto? Because Ruto has basically said that he expects a favor in 2022 from Mr. Kenyatta. And part of the reason why he disbanded his own party to form this one party is to signal that good intention. Right. But I think that's where the trick is. We should look at the body language around Jubilee, and obviously, President Moi, Raila Odinga cannot see eye to eye on many issues. It would never be feasible for his son to be on the other side, and it will be a longer wait for Gideon Moi should NASA become successful in the next election. So from a personal interest and from the interest of the political establishment families, what Gideon Moi is doing is the thing that is expedient. It is the right political move to make under these circumstances. Under the political calculus, this is the right move. The question is, what does it do for Jubilee internally?
Right. Prof.
There are several ways one could look at this thing. My primary approach is, I think that the visit by Mama Ngina and the visit by her son is triggered by the NASA idea that you cannot sail using the old wind now that NASA, Mudavadi has gone back, and that automatically increases their numbers by 400 or 500. It means that the threat, it becomes more imminent than it was before. That's a primary way of looking. The second one is that retired President Moi has been itching for a long time to get one of his children to be running the country, like the Kenyatta's had its turn, and I believe that was the calculation for which he was sponsoring Uhuru to get into power, so that when the time comes, the Kenyatta family can reciprocate by supporting his son to access to power, which means that we're talking about a calculation for 2022.
All right.
Now, the third aspect of that is that if you look at, as a result of those visits, if you look at the body language of Deputy President Ruto, he's a man under siege. Because if Gideon remains and supports the Kenyatta family, quite clearly it is at his political expense, all right? Which means then Gideon becomes an alternative for 2022, and which creates a window for in case of internal conflict, all right? Kenyatta can actually make an alternative arrangement, all right? Leave Ruto out and get a replacement. Now that will make the dynamic extremely complex.
All right.
You can't see any quick action that responds to that.
Okay, let me throw a spanner in the works in this.
Yes.
Dr. Awiti, does Kanu really have the political clout that it used to have to, to shake away the Deputy President William Ruto factor in this Jubilee and Kanu thing?
Well, I think if you look at, say, the Kericho Senate by-election and the very hard-fought contest between those two parties, and I think Gideon really showed muscle then and gave URP, quote-unquote, a run for its money. And I think if you take away the fact that it was Keter's seat, Keter was getting into government, Ruto had all the prestige and the enormous state apparatus supporting that senatorial bid. If you took away that, that would have been a very fair, even contest between those two parties. And I think part of me believes that the reason why Mr. Kenyatta didn't get involved in that contest was probably to send Mr. Ruto a message. Because I think in many ways he has become very comfortable. He's kind of assumed himself to be a co-president. And I think a lot of that, if you look at Kenyan politics, there's no deputy or vice president who wields independent, enormous power. Those powers get checked at one point, from Odinga to Kenyatta and Moi, to Moi and Kibaki, to Moi and Saitoti. We see all of that play. And it is always believed that in any event when there's a kingmaker, at some point, Machiavellian, if you look at the rules of power, you kind of show the guys who claim to have put you in power their rightful place. So I think this took a much longer time because it was a very tricky arrangement in the Jubilee coalition. But you're beginning to see Mr. Kenyatta coming out boldly as his own person. If you see the way he's conducted the voter drive, you see a man who's come of age. He's got the charisma. Previously when he started his political campaign in 2012, people thought it was waning, and everybody believes that Ruto energized it. And that's true. But now you see Mr. Kenyatta coming out with full fire and a fight in his belly. He's beginning to own and claim that space. So I think that also puts pressure on Ruto, because I think Mr. Kenyatta now on his own, with the incumbency, can basically go out and get the vote. So this is not really about the number of votes that Ruto can pull out of Rift Valley. It is, as Prof has said, what is the political arrangement? What is the calculus post-2017? It's not about the number of votes that they're going to pull. If Kanu is not on the ballot for the presidency, all the votes are going to one place.
Yeah, true. All right, Prof, Kanu is very strong in Baringo, West Pokot, maybe Elgeyo Marakwet a bit. Does it have the strength to be of any help to Jubilee, or is the Moi factor, that name, sufficient?
I think that there are two ways of looking at that. The first one is that if you look at areas where Kanu is strong, the numbers there are thin. They are thin. If you look at West Pokot, they are thin. If you look in Baringo, they are thin. And there may be some in Kericho, Bomet, but the numbers are thin.
Okay.
Now, so on the basis of numbers only, Kanu will bring relatively small numbers. Now, if you look at the overall impact, in other words, the numbers may be small, but they may be absolutely destabilizing, particularly for Ruto. If those begin going, then other people must get a signal that our cousins have gone this way, can we join them? So you may have a cascade effect, which then becomes bigger than it is. The third aspect of that is that the impact of Kanu by itself may not be as big as expected, but there are many malcontents, people that Ruto has stepped, on whose toes he has stepped to get where he's got. Don't forget Ruto is extremely self-confident, he's extremely ambitious, and he has a great search and desire for fame and recognition. So his motivating factors are very, very huge. So all that he wants to maintain is a complete control of territory they have already conquered. Now, the impact of Kanu is not likely to be direct. It is its ramifications, it is signals.
All right.
It is its, yeah.
Let's get Daktari's view. Dr. Ongeti, how complicated is this for the Deputy President from where you sit?
I don't think it is complicated in any way, Ben, and I disagree with Professor that the Deputy President is under any siege. To the contrary, I think in where I sit, initially I thought that the DP would have been interested in starting to plan 2022 right now. But looking at the numbers, even as the voter registration exercise comes to an end, it becomes very difficult to have two planning horizons. There can only be one planning horizon, and that is the 2017 elections. And that is what I think is the focus for a Jubilee party, because if those numbers are anything to go by, and then NASA holds together, then this election is likely to be too close to call. And so any additional number on the table is a number that Jubilee will be looking forward to.
So you don't believe?
So in my view, I think that
you don't believe the activity surrounding Kanu and the Moi and Kenyatta factors are part of 2022 machinations?
I don't think so, because after all, even if Gideon was to come to the table right now, he still has to travel a long distance. As Prof has rightly put it, Kanu traditionally enjoyed a cross-cutting support in the country, but today those numbers have been reduced into very small areas of this country. You are talking about a little bit of, or rather in Baringo, where it has considerable support, and then parts of West Pokot, and a little bit of the North Rift, including Nandi, and a little bit of Trans Nzoia. The rest of the country has, of course, had other players coming in. So if we are talking about 2022, then the Deputy President has been able to use his position pretty well and created deep networks across the country. So I don't think that at this particular moment it would be anything. I mean, the Deputy President and Gideon Moi, in terms of political maturity, they're not comparable.
Dr. disagrees with you there.
Well, I think, there's a lot of contingency in Kenyan politics, and you have to understand that, let's just call it what it is. This is the game of strong familial ties. And I think Ruto serves at the pleasure of Mr. Kenyatta. And yes, he's right that any numbers that he brings to the table, Gideon Moi at this time, are important. But I think we would be doing a little disservice to this political analysis if we just stick with 2017. I think we've got to see the bigger messages, as Prof said, this is a game of reciprocity here. So insofar, Ruto's networks are only as strong and active as he is as he holds that office. Right. We know all of these things. I thought he was a very powerful vice president, et cetera, et cetera. But Raila was a powerful prime minister, et cetera, et cetera. But you see, once you leave office, those apparatus go. It is very difficult to maintain those networks. I think what we're basically saying is if Jubilee Party right now decides on Uhuru's advice to bring Kanu into a coalition with Jubilee, I don't think it is in Mr. Ruto's space to say no.
All right.
Because he might actually be upsetting his boss. And if you look at the structure of the party, I think that says a lot. And if you remember in 2016, when the dissolution of URP and TNA started, they protested and said that Kanu shouldn't come on board.
Right.
After these visits, Murkomen has been up in arms, and everybody around Mr. Ruto basically saying they're watching this closely, and they've been very guarded about their reaction.
Ruto supporters would argue that Ruto was his own man even before he became deputy president, was able to galvanize the Rift Valley.
I think that's not entirely true. Because if who brought Ruto into politics? There's YK92, it's Mr. Moi.
Obviously.
And so I think there is a history to these things. And I think part of the analysis is just to be respectful to the history that we have. Because it is a great canvas around which we can think about these issues. And I think ethnic power is not independent on its own. And if you don't have the power of office, you kind of flounder. It's very difficult to sustain active engagement in politics, even as an ethnic honcho. Mudavadi will tell you that, Raila will tell you that,
when you're out of office.
When you're out of office. So I think some of these things, we should not overestimate Mr. Ruto, neither should we underestimate him. But I think we should really take this with a bit of humility in trying to understand the political context in which he's operating.
All right. You're watching Choice 2017 here on KTN News. Many thanks for staying with us. Remember, we are seeking your contribution to the discussion. We're asking you, what do you think about the way forward for Kanu? Keep those tweets coming. When we return, we shall continue this conversation and wrap it up. Prof, when we return, we'll take a look at how the Deputy President reacts to this, all this that is happening. That is after this quick commercial break. Don't go too far.